Hello guys, welcome to Major's Garage. This is Suellio. I'm the crew chief for the Formula 3 and Formula 3.5. Today we're gonna see my lap here and analyze it at Road America. So pretty pretty fun track to drive, although there are some specific traps that we need to be aware of, and they are the bumps. So I want to talk about the bumps specifically because they are somehow frustrating, because if you're not aware that the bumps is causing that the bumps are causing your car to spin, you end up thinking that you're not good at this track, that you feel that something's not right, but it's really specifically the bumps. So let's see where they are. Here at the way down of this curve, it's not actually a bump, but it can unsettle the car. As you can see here, I go. Oh, I'm sorry. I go on the throttle, but then I end up releasing a little bit. So full throttle, not full throttle, almost, but then I have to release a little bit, specifically because I actually felt that could unsettle the car a little bit. So this is the first one. Now I think there's no one on this one. Just be aware that this exit may be tricky here. It's not necessarily a bump, but since you're going on and off the curb, you can actually lose the rear here. Actually, I had to correct a little bit specifically because of that. Then we have here. This is another bump that we need to be aware, because it's always going to be there. Right now, boom, it's actually the way down from this tarmac patch here. So we need to be aware of that before going full throttle. And then this is tricky here. There's also a little bit of a bump here, you see? We need to be aware of that. This one, this curb here, it can be treated as a small bump, because if you go over it too hard and you're like full throttle trying to turn the car a lot, on the way down from the curb you may end up spinning. So we need to be aware of that, and I will talk about how to turn in to prevent that. Then here, not actually a bump, just a lower curb than the actual track, which is somehow good, but for this car it's not that useful because it's too quick and it can unsettle the car. And of course, on this patch here, we have another bump. Boom, there it is. This one is okay, nothing to worry about. And then we have this one is terrible. So this one, boom, there it goes. You can see it bounces like twice or 3 times, and also on the way out, boom, bounces less, but it's there. You have to be aware of that. Then there's this curb here. Actually, let me see. Yeah, the way out of this first curb is also unsettling. We need to be aware of that. And then also this curb, I actually want to avoid it, because I already spun here. that's why. Also, this curb here, we definitely want to avoid, because it makes the car bottom out slightly, and sometimes on the way down, especially if you are full throttle, you may end up spinning to the left here, which is not good. And then we have this one. Again, boom, terrible, really not good. I actually did lock up my fronts sometimes here. So specifically because we're braking and already turning a little bit to the right, we end up locking up this tire. We end up locking the right front tire. So we need to be aware of that and not brake too hard, or start turning even more only after the bump. And then the last one would be this one. This is terrible. I spun here many times because of this bump, so boom, there it is. We need to wait. So we need to pass this bump before we go full throttle. As you can see, I'm actually doing that. I would probably go full throttle before, but I had to wait for the bump before actually flooring. So yeah, those are the bumps. Now let's go normally about the corners. For this corner, the first one, I use my reference is the last single cone. I brake slightly before it, and I turn in. Actually, I don't think about where I turn in. I think about where I start braking, and then immediately I start looking at the apex. My goal here is to be over the curb as soon as possible, and then get back on the throttle as soon as possible too. So brake at the cone, not too hard. It's around like 55%, and then immediately start releasing. There's no time to keep braking here. You see, I brake and then immediately I start releasing and turning, and then little bit of trail braking here, and then as soon as I am over the curb, I try to be very aggressive on the throttle. So full throttle, and then of course a little bit of lifting, just being aware of that bump. Then for this one, my braking reference is the 1 here. You can see that there's a line here that represents that 1 distance. I actually start braking slightly before, as you can see, but my maximum pressure is around that. So when we're coming so quickly to a reference, generally I start braking slightly before that, but I still look at it as a reference. I'm actually looking at an area, so let's say like that. So it's something between the 1 and the end of this wall here, but I always end up braking way before the end of the wall, but somewhat closer to the 1 sign. And see how close I am to the white line here. This is very important. I also forgot to say that here. So you see how close you have to be to the white line if you want to get a very good entry speed and a good arc, so you can carry a minimum speed that is higher, as high as possible. So here, this time I actually brake a little bit on a straight line for like maybe half a second, or maybe even maybe even less than that. It also release a lot, and this is again a slightly and weirdly early apex, because the corner is slightly banked, so you can turn in as early, not as early as possible, but slightly earlier than you would think, and then get back in the throttle halfway on the inside curve. Again, be aware of the bumps here, so we always have to memorize where the bumps are. So here we have one more, and we have to wait for it before we go full throttle. Then for the next one, my reference is something between the 2 and the beginning of the curb. So let's see where I start braking. So yeah, you see I'm starting to brake here. My maximum pressure is around here, still before the curb. And then there's something very important here. The track turns slightly to the left. We need to ignore that somehow, because we don't want to brake hard on a straight line. I'm sorry, we don't want to brake hard while turning. We want to brake hard on a straight line. If we start turning, we lock the front tires and the car goes straight. So what we really want here is to turn slightly before. You can see I'm actually turning like a hair before, and then when I start braking, I let my car go on a straight line. So you see that I end up going slightly over the curb, not slightly, like a lot over the curb, because the curb is coming to the left, but I'm still braking on a straight line. This is very important. It also allows you for wider entry. And here, waiting a little bit for that bump. Maybe I was slightly too aggressive. You can see the tire marks here. I could be quicker here without that tire spin. And then for this one is complicated. The track is falling a lot, so there's not a lot of mechanical grip, and we're not at a very high speed, so we definitely need to be careful with the brakes. It's so easy to lock up the tires here. So let's see where I start braking. Start braking slightly before, I mean a lot before the bridge. If we did not have this the track coming down like that, we would brake much later, but this is not the case. So we need to brake quite early and not too hard. As you can see, my maximum brakes here are around 45, maybe 40%. And then immediately I'm already releasing, because definitely as the track falls, you don't want to be braking hard. You will lock the front tires or even the rear tires here and spin. So it's very, very, very delicate to brake on this corner. And then you see that I imagine that I'm turning slightly early. I want to turn slightly early, because if you fail to turn early, the car kind of refuses to turn, and you understeer heavily. It's definitely not good. So I want to turn early and carry as little trail braking as possible, and then I wait a little bit with coasting until I feel confident to go back on the throttle. So let's see that again, full speed. And always braking very close to the white line. This is very important. So for this one, I told before that we definitely need to avoid, or at least prevent, using too much this curb. You see, I still use it a little bit, but some people want to use it even more to make it easier in a way, because your arc would be wider, but it's slightly high, so if you hit it too hard, you can spin. So what I do is I really focus on the entry, and I want to be very close, actually over the white line, so I can have a slightly wider entry. I don't need to turn the car too aggressively. I turn it very gently, planning, and also I want to have my rotation done slightly before the curb. So whenever I am at the curb, I already turned a lot of what I needed, and my line is slightly straighter here. So instead of being like straight here and then trying to turn a lot over the curb, you want to turn a lot before the curb and then go over the curb, turning less. That's exactly what I feel is easy to do. I feel that's how I feel it's the easier way to do this corner without being too without being in a dangerous situation. So for the next one, I brake at the 2, probably slightly before actually, but then my maximum brakes being exactly at the 2, as you can see here, this white line. Braking really on a straight line. I was slightly turning a little bit while braking, not optimal, because you can see my car goes like 1 degree to the left, 1 degree to the left, to the right. I don't want that, but as you had a good one on this one, I don't really want to go over the curb. I went like slightly, but it's more important that we brake on a straight line. And then I delay slightly the downshift to the second gear, because I don't want too much engine brakes. I want to turn in on third, and then halfway to the apex, I want to go back to down to the second gear. Then very careful on the throttle here, because this corner, this exit is almost flat. There's no banking, so you have a little bit of like, not less grip than you expect, but it's not more grip as you want. So it's always like slightly tricky here, because maybe it's even off camber, I would say. It's just not optimal. You generally have less grip than you want here. So be careful with the throttle exit. We can get a little bit of descent here, but if you get too much, you can either spin to these tires, that's why they're here, or you will get an off track and invalidate your lap in case of qualifying. For this, we want to come a lot to the left here and then turn in very patiently. We don't want to turn in early. We want to turn late. We want to be on the outside part of this darker rubber path here. So you see I'm turning. This is around the place where I want to be. Ideally I want to lift just once, but I lifted too quickly. I came back on the throttle too early, so I had to lift again. This is not optimal. Ideally we want to lift just once. So here turning late, lift, and then back on the throttle, and then lift again and back on the throttle. It was slightly a mistake, but it was still good. This one you can do flat out, and then for this corner I'm braking slightly before the 2. I'm looking at the 2, and then probably for a qualifying fuel we would brake at the 2, but for racing fuel we brake slightly before, but my maximum pressures are at the 2. So as you can see, the same thing. I use the references for my maximum pressure, not for my beginning of the brakes. Here braking a lot on a straight line, downshifting like a shotgun. Not shotgun, like I don't know, semi-automatic gun, ba 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 ba, because I really want the engine brakes to turn in the car. Probably, I think it's third gear, so 6, and then pa 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 pa, third gear. Then as soon as we are over this curve, we want to already be back on the throttle, not too aggressively though, because we have this bump. We have this bump here on entry, and then this bump here on exit. So we want to be aware of that. And then for this one is the same thing as that corner after the one under the bridge. We want to turn slightly late, and we want to make all the rotation happen before we actually hit that curb. And actually I don't really want to hit that curb. You can be over the white line, but don't hit this curb. It's not gonna be good. The car is unsettled a little bit, and it wants to spin, so we don't want that. So really late turn in, very patient, and also avoid this curb here because it's very high and you can bottom out. Then for the last corner, I am looking at the middle of this darker part here. I am actually starting to brake slightly earlier, but again my maximum brake pressure is around the middle of this area here. So here, this would be my maximum pressure. I never actually look at the signs here, 3, 2, 1. It would be something between the 3 and the 2. And then I want to not turn a lot. As I said before, we have this bump here. We want to be drifting slightly to the curb. This is dangerous. The first like 3 times I tried, I went to the wall. But this is exactly the fast way. Actually, I didn't use a lot of this curb, but I want to be as close as possible so I can have a very wide entry. Maybe with a little bit of practice, I could go over this curb a little bit more, but I am not sure about that. You should try. But definitely be aware of this bump here. It can make your lock off the front a lot, and it's not good. Then getting back on the throttle early, early, but being aware of this bump before actually going full throttle. So it's like throttle, bump, full throttle. That's what I think about here. Boom, yeah, bump, full throttle, yeah. So yeah, I hope this will help you guys, and have a really fun week, and see you next week. Bye.